Excellent. Thank you. And I'm hoping you can hear me. I assume if you can't, you'll be yelling at me very shortly. So uh, thank you all. First, a content warning. DevSecOps, cybersecurity. If you're still here, I'm happy. I personally hate those terms, but the business uses them all the time. They are what I do, and I'm sure I'm going to mention them. So this talk is aimed at a few audiences. It's aimed at the people who sort of build things, who break things, who fix things, but it's also people who build processes and influence people, and for people who just care about actually getting security right in our new world. And so I'm going to be building on a lot of other people's work today. There's not one thing anyone can do in the blue team to fix things, and there's been a whole lot of work that a lot of people have gone in to sort of fix these things that we do over time. Content's largely non-technical because my goal here is to change how we do security, not necessarily what we're doing. So I'm going to give some tips, and the reason why I'm doing this is because, frankly, I think we're falling behind. As product, as digital, as development, as cloud continues to move apace, we're doing things that simply just don't work as well anymore. So give some guidance for that. Excellent. But first thing I have to do is I have to set the scene. This is probably the origin of the quote. There's only two types of companies, those that know they've been compromised and those that don't know. There's a lot of different attribution around that. So you have people from Cisco saying they said it first. You have this dude, you have others. But really, the point is, this quote is sort of how we live now. These are words that we read in the industry: assumed breach, insider threat, inevitable compromise. This is all very true, but it sort of leads to a certain way of thinking. It's informed how we do security, and over the last few years, it's really had an impact on what we do day to day. And I would like you to keep that in mind as I continue to talk. So the other bit of context I want for setting the scene is that security is still a maturing discipline. There's a lot of different formative factors that we've had that have, these are things that have actually really helped us get where we are. I mean, we're an industry of out-of-the-box thinkers. We're autodidacts. We, as many people have talked about, including Mark Large Cardinal on Twitter, there is no real baseline for what a security analyst or even a security engineer or a security architect or anyone does. It's all made up by the person who writes the job spec, and we know how good those are. We're full of rockstar attitudes, and I can still think of the first time I went to DC 4420 in London, and 80% of the people in the room, and there are probably a good 60, 70 people in the room, said they were just a pen tester. Sure, about half of them were. Yeah, and yet it's still hard to hire for. So yeah, security is really something that is the business still trying to get a handle on. And this is really sort of how we fall into things. We've come to see some common patterns, no matter what vertical we're in. We got some red team people, we break things. We got some blue team people, we yell at people who aren't doing things right, and we try to fix the things that happen when damage gets in. And in theory, the blue team does a lot more stuff around policy, does a lot more stuff around outreach and protection. But in practice, this is where a lot of us fall. As security teams, we defend, we tell IT to do better, and it generally doesn't happen. We don't usually have that much space in our lives and in our teams for the builders. And these cards, by the way, they're definitely not mine. These are from April Wright. These are from Louis Cremon. There's links at the bottom of this. This is a whole separate talking of itself around the color wheel that I'm not going to talk to you right here. But the point is, in our teams, the yellow team, the software builders, the application developers, the architects, they very often aren't on our teams. They very often go and build the stuff on the left-hand side of the slide. Really what you're seeing here, the yellow team, along with a whole bunch of other people, they go to the left of this slide over the years. All the red and blue teamers, we form up here on the right, and we defend or attach ourselves to the stuff on the left. So what that means is that the stuff on the left is how we determine what we had to do on the right. Industrial plants, data centers, e-commerce sites, brick and mortar users, cybersecurity as an organization has been built around that. We're doing this on the fly after all, and despite an inconsistent starting base for our own teams, the business was forming in some pretty common patterns. So what we have on the right, we have security checks, we have pen testers, we have people writing policy. We probably have a really busy SOC. You got some engineering and architecture outreach, and you have a lot of different both legitimate asks from your end users and threats from attackers, end users, and all that. And a lot of those people in the business over here on the left really made our lives hard over the last 2 decades. And I do mean that. This model hasn't really changed much and over the last 2 decades. It's gotten a little bit bigger. So this sort of worked. No one really did prioritize security enough. We all know that if we've spent any time in the field lately. But things would usually get caught by the SOC. Sometimes incidents would be detected. Eventually, depending on your maturity, depending on the size of your org, and depending upon whether or not you had a security team and whether or not you had a breach recently enough to have funding. Because that's the pattern that we've all joked about for years, isn't it? Until there's a breach, you don't really get funding. Until there's a breach, security doesn't get enough resource to do its job. And this is because really, there's a fundamental disconnect between security policy and business incentive. The way it works is that shinier work with budget wins. So obviously what we did for the last 20 years is we fixed this right now. This is the de facto business approach to planning and doing security for the last 2 decades. You set up a team, you give them both budget, you don't connect them policy-wise, and then security yells and gets funding when things finally fall apart, and you repeat that cycle. Either way, that sort of got us along. Time has passed, things have started changing. Security is more of a problem, ransomware is more of a problem, but security is starting to become recognized by the business a lot more. People are starting to say, I need or I want to do security. Not that they know what it is, but they want to do it. And so the theme since this time in the modern era has become more breaches, more events, more SOCs, more specialisms, more teams, more ransomware, and more ransomware. Did I say ransomware? All of these issues have started to add up. We are seeing a lot of security events in the news. We all know that. People are starting to care about this, and the business is starting to try to figure out how to do security better. Silicon Valley knows that. We've continued to ignore the systemic factors to do security right for decades because Silicon Valley and marketing and budgets were all there to tell us that they had silver bullets to fix us. We know this. Cloud security tooling has massively entered our industry. Now cloud security tooling is a stagnant market because every single innovative product gets snapped up by a large corporate trying to enhance their portfolio. And all of this is really confusing the space we operate in. So yeah, we're in a modern era. Lots of breaches, lots of shiny tools, lots of marketing, and we're in a bubble and the defender doesn't know what to do and when to do it. So yeah, the security team, they had to respond to this. And what did they do? Well, let's see, security first. On the right here, they expanded. The blue hexes are additional sort of teams and disciplines we've matured over the last 2 decades. The green ones are sort of the enhanced SecOps and red team and detection focus we have. And of course, we've got a bit more advanced of a criminal environment here on this slide too. So yeah, what we did is we centralized our tools and our processes. We standardized them. Our threat landscape has massively increased and the information we got, so we industrialized. And I think anyone who's working in a SOC knows that really that's the focus now, industrializing, scale, automation, figuring out how we can do more with less time and limited information. Why do we do this? Well, because legacy enterprise, the thing on the left, is so full of tech debt and obsolete security that breach is inevitable. So we focus there. But let's step back a bit, because that wasn't necessarily the wrong thing to do, but it does change things slightly. And really, the thing is that while we got bigger as a security team, our model didn't change. But the application wall did. It got complex. We got cloud, and cloud enabled new models and new ways of doing things. Remember, the biggest reason why we did things the way we do is because the business operated the same way, and the cloud has shifted how the business operates. Startups may go all cloud with a little bit of on-prem and random laptops that we bring in. Small businesses in the eternal land of hybrid. Enterprises with shadow clouds, and of course, people who actually do cloud native right. These are all different security topologies. These are all different ways to give advice to the business and require different ways that security operates. And while we are still figuring that out, it multiplied because it's very easy to build more clouds. So suddenly you might have several dozen shadow clouds across a horrifying breadth of maturity because business can change frighteningly fast. So yeah, all of these people, they want security to give advice and security doesn't have time to them. So you've gone from 0 to dozens of cloud instances to organizations of SaaS services or some variant of above. And it's almost bewildering how quick it's happening to a lot of security teams. And John Cutler's quote on the right here really says it all. A digital product team, and we say product here, this product is a great example, but a digital team can build things for a business product, for e-commerce, for operations. I mean, I've done my time in heavy industry and it's just as viable to being, what's the word? It's a polite word for hack, but the revolutionized by the cloud. That's the right word. But point is these teams can do everything all in one. There's no blockers or no other enterprise bits that make it slow down. So with all of that going on, where does that leave security? Like I said, we haven't really changed much. It's 2021. People care about security now, right? They care about security now, but they don't necessarily know what it is. So they all come to us. And that's lots of questions we're getting asked. We have DevSecOps teams. They do something. There's, no, they do. Anyone? They're just another team who try to influence the business so often when I see them. They often are using the same self-serve model that information security teams have been using day in, day out. And so they're just sort of doing the same thing as other teams with the new name. Have we just made the role description problem worse? Yes, we have. This is a hammer. Remember what I was saying earlier about our assumed breach mentality? Now it's valid. What we've just been talking through, most networks, large and small, and this includes cloud networks, they're held together by so much sticking plaster and tech debt that it's worth investing into detection and response. And let's see. Let's make sure I'm not being too controversial here. It's always worth investing into detection and response. Prevention is absolutely not a panacea. But the thing is that humans take shortcuts. When you only have a hammer, everything is a nail. And in enterprise security, we have a lot of hammers. I'm going to geek out in words for a second. That particular phrase is called the law of the instrument. It's probably at least a century older than the two Abrahams, Maslow and Kaplan, who are usually quoted with saying it. It's also attributed to people making fun of Birmingham. And it's just about humanity's habit of using the tool that comes to hand. And in information technology, it's called the golden hammer. As literature, a programming practice to be avoided, relevant in the 21st century, and is highly applicable to software development. Many times, software developers, this person has observed, tend to use the same tools to do a completely new, different project with new constraints. In other words, in technology, we have a habit of applying a comfortable approach to a new problem. And we're doing it right now in enterprise tech. Hopefully you're not getting tired of me saying that, because I probably have another 15 minutes of me saying that. So really, we've gone from a fundamental disconnect in policy between security and the business to a fundamental disconnect in policy and practice. So we've just gotten worse because now our environments don't even match our tools. And as a security team, if you're lucky, what that results in is your traditional on-premise problem magnified by the number of clouds you have. That's not a great situation to be in, but that's a lucky situation. If you're unlucky, then you end up with bigger mismatches. Things that aren't desired, things that you don't want, or things that you want, they don't get budgeted. Controls that you try to get put in get deprioritized as these gaps sort of widen. Patches get missed when engineers are reassigned. All these sort of gaps that wonder when you're wondering why these great controls aren't operating in reality. So the reason for that is the more cloud native and more mature your dev, product, engineer, SRE, whatever you want to call them, team is, the more likely you have a number of discrete, independent environments or tool sets or concerns or things that have different security topologies and different models, different ways of doing things and different things you may or may not want to look at. And our model, enterprise security, it doesn't scale when the tool sets multiply. The support demand on the security team increases with every piece of new tech and policy ask. All of these new platforms, they don't get properly onboarded. And what do? We simplify more. One tool set to rule them all. Maintain SOC viability at the cost of advising the business of our core thing, and focus on incident response and centralized control. That is the mantra of many modern security teams in face of the ever increasing cloud ask. Why, really? Please ignore the rubbish words on the right. I love them because this four-tiered structure makes sense. It's from the Cloud Security Alliance. I have never come up with the term Atlas structure myself, and if I could come up with a better term than they did, I would use it. But yeah, let's take a look at why. What happened in the cloud is something very important happened. Our traditional three-tier infrastructure application data model became a four-tier model. A cloud management barrier was introduced. That's what's called the metastructure on this page. And that cloud management barrier has changed where security decisions get made. It's not that DevSecOps is an annoying buzzword that we try to do. DevSecOps is something that is going to get done in your cloud, whether or not enterprise security is involved or not, because the decisions are made when the cloud is built. And it's frighteningly easy to do cloud security wrong, not just for the engineers who aren't getting security advice, but for security people who don't understand that the topology they're advising on is different. And that's the risk of us getting left behind, not poor service, but incorrect service. So all that said, it's actually a good thing because new topologies and new environments allow some old truisms or industry to actually be true again. For example, this one. We've said it a lot. Security is everyone's responsibility, but cloud actually makes it true. People in the front line are making as many or more decisions as we are in the back. Now we have to share that responsibility with them and take responsibility for how we support their decisions. This is the democratization of cloud security. Cloud centralized security processes like ours are just not made for the scale, control, or context that we need to give. Some of our processes do, don't get me wrong, and I'm sure there's people in the audience right now who are naysaying me. We have automated scanning tools, SAS, DAST, SCA, IAST, infrastructure as code scanning. A few cloud security posture management tools are even graph capable. Fortunately, I haven't gotten a chance to play with them too much. Love to. These tools abound, and there's plenty of salespeople who are willing to tell you how this will give you perfect visibility of the environment that you don't understand. You see the problem there. It masks the problems. All these tools, all this ability to see masks the problem that central policy isn't useful. Centralized control doesn't scale. Ivory tower teams like enterprise security don't play nice with product teams who are at the front line. And when questions go unanswered, they cease to be asked when teams find workarounds. So the impacts happen. Engineering teams confronted by inappropriate or inapplicable advice, buggy security tooling, brutal administrative processes, they don't make bad decisions, they care, but they start doing things themselves because it's not just easier, but often smoother and possibly more secure than getting inconsistent advice from a security team. And given that most enterprise security teams, due to resource constraints, operate on a self-serve model for advice, this just means that the security team themselves lose visibility of what the business is doing. These gaps can be brutal for the security in the business. You get shadow IT, you get major availability issues, unknown control gaps. Hell, product making security decisions is actually huge. So yeah, you get a whole bunch of tech out of it. And it ain't great. If we don't step up to the plate that we need, we're going nowhere, and we're going to play whack-a-mole in our socks the entire way and think we're doing the right thing until we're left behind in the middle of a desert somewhere. Now, There's a lot we can do about this, and so I'm now in the last third of the talk. I seem to be doing well. Now I'm going to talk about how we can do stuff about this, and hopefully what I'm going to do here is talk about how our role is evolving. In this next section, I'm going to give you 4 changes in practice that we can implement in our teams. The goal here is to create a cultural shift. It's not going to be easy. We're going to need to burn down anti-patterns. We're going to need to structure our teams to respond to the business, or at least think about ways we can enable the business to interact with us in a scalable fashion. And that last is the key. So I'm going to talk about a very, very high level couple of models that could possibly handle that at the end of this. But just your mileage may vary. This is work and your teams will be different than ours. So let's get on to those practices. Yeah, first one, prevention. It is still possible. It is still worth enabling. It's not to say that prevention is a panacea. It never has been. Detection and response are still king. But we have been so focused on assumed breach that we haven't very often realized that most cloud deployments are greenfield. You can tool for detection and response just as well as you can tool for prevention if you engage early. And if you engage early, the sky is the limit. Engineer your administrative model for your cloud to reduce your attack surface and reduce your dependencies on your on-prem tech debt. Engineer your change processes to minimize your control drift. Manage your cloud IAM so that you're reducing your attack surface. And please use cloud native tools. We need to change our architecture and tooling practices to do this, not just prevention, but we need to understand the cattle versus pet slide here. And yes, I put a slide into a slide because it's 2012 slides can be meta now. So yeah, in 2012, the cats versus pedal, great Gabe. The cattle versus pets model came out for DevOps. I'm not going to go into too much detail. It's here in case you want to look at it, but we have to adopt that in security. Tools are now cattle, especially when it comes into cloud. We have to be willing to give them away and accept the results from local tooling, from cloud native sources and things that can really understand the environments that they're feeding from instead of relying on one central tool. We need to enable context-rich policy. That is policy that isn't generic for an entire org, but is relevant to the threat landscape of the cloud environment or product environment that we're operating in. If our DevOps are advanced, we need to look at CI/CD pipelines. We need to look at how we're handling assets, how we're handling artifactories, repositories, and things like this. We have to understand whether and where we're applying principles such as immutability or ephemerality, and so on. That's one of the models that I'm listing on the left here. And this is a fundamental change. So even before we do that with the tech, we have to assess our control objectives, the ones that we've been leaning on for 25 years on the on-prem environment, and figure out if, given that the foundation has changed, figure out if our control implementations are going to be effective and necessary as they are in the cloud. First, we have to check those, and then we have to push them to the cloud. Then business-wise, so that was the tech and architecture. Business-wise, we need to start sharing responsibility. We need to start treating the business like a partner. We need to change our nebulous control objectives into a shared responsibility framework that the business and stakeholders have agreed to, and they can build to. Then we engage those engineering stakeholders, because frankly, an engaged engineering stakeholder will probably build your security tool before you're done. And finally, we need to plan for our impact on the business teams. I have seen EDR deployments that can be forecast to over, I'd say, 150% increase the operating costs of container environments because of odd resource allocations that needed to be fixed. I've seen cases where security teams have yelled at product teams because the security team's Nessus scanner needed to be patched. I've seen all sorts of things, and engineers care about trust. They care about getting it right. They don't like being yelled at for really silly things, so please don't break your trust. If you impact engineers, talk to them and work with them, because now that engineers care about security, they're going to try to do it right, but they're not going to like being talked down to. So let's go for participatory engagement. And that way we won't bottleneck them. Yes. And finally, encourage cross-functional skills in your teams. And I don't mean go build a green team or an orange team or a purple team. We've all heard those terms. Those are just ways of crossing skills between red, blue, yellow, and white, and all these other things on here. Again, I happen to love this color wheel. But we need more builders. We need more consultants. We need more project managers in our team and more engineers. We need our roles to be cross-functional. So if I'm talking to someone in the SOC, they've actually done a bit of time engineering or building. They know what it's like to have to operate something. We need to support when a business function builds an embedded security function. And these are some thoughts on what that might look like. Mario's great. He talks a lot more about this. This is one of his slides in the lower left. And I've linked to both the book he sourced it from and his talks. He's actually talking a bit about risk and this stuff next week, I think. But the point is, what you see here on the left is you see a security engineering or AppSec team that crosses streams from business to platform to information risk so that the context is shared, and when audit comes along, they have an idea of what's going on. Now, I don't know about you, but every auditor I knew got their instructions at the beginning and went from that. So if we don't tell the auditors from the CISO's office to do that, they're not going to listen. So yeah, we have to plan for this. Engage with your business. So I promised a model on how to do this, and I'm in my last 4 or so minutes, so I'm going to run through this really quick. What can you do when you have multiplying cloud environments and not enough assurance? Here's a template for thought. If you only have central cybersecurity, you can't do that much. You can do the things on the upper left, try to hire some more builders, develop some policies that are central to your thing. But really what you see happening in the business is with cloud, well, cloud empowers teams, and digital product teams and other teams that use cloud have figured out this, and they start to build on their own cloud centers of excellence. This isn't something that we're expecting security to do. It's just something that happens. And cloud centers of excellence are something that you can leverage. They can implement organizational controls across the cloud. You can try to ensure there's standardized tools and patterns that make it harder for people to mess up. They can offer network visibility. I mean, it all depends on what types of cloud you have. But engaging with them is extraordinarily useful. And you can federate your DevSecOps team. That's that little green bubble in the upper right here. You can federate your DevSecOps team into those environments, and possibly, I mean, often they'll be funding half of them. So work with them and actually build your controls into teams who don't necessarily report to enterprise security. And finally, when you get to something where your cloud is your main product line, really important, speed is still critical, we need to start looking at integrated security teams. We need to start building out, like most of the major cloud providers, bespoke paved roads, so to speak, so that developers, engineers, and SREs can find the easy way to the right tools to install and continue to build quickly. So what you do with this model, now obviously you don't see any of your favorite ISOs, blah, blah domains there, sorry. Take NIST, take CIS, take ISO, or my recommendation for cloud, take these Cloud Security Alliance's 14 control domains, layer those on the top, pull them down across this and see how far you want to embed each of your control domains. That's how you build your starting point for figuring out a new cloud model. I'm not talking through this slide. This is for the 45-minute version of the talk. But if you look at these slides later after after these are published, you can look at these just for some patterns or anti-patterns that we're trying to avoid doing in the cloud security environments. So I'm going to wrap up in a second. Sorry for the fire hose. I do talk a lot and I have a lot of information. As promised, there's going to be links on the next page right after this. Wrapping it all up. Well, we're out of touch. As central security functions, we need to do better for our engineers. We need to align our security model. We need to put in the work to get this right. And I've just talked through all the changes we have to do. They're repeated here for your convenience, but let's start partnering with the business. Let's start engaging them. So yes, let's start getting cloud security right. Thank you. I hope that was helpful. These slides will be available later. And I'm going to leave it over to my host in the upper right.